Here is Ted Kuntz, president of Vaccine Choice Canada, to speak about the new CDC child vaccination policies. I guess I'll call them policies. Ted, what's going on?
Nice to see you, Nico. Rob, nice to see you as well.
So, funny enough, today about
thanks for your time.
So funny enough, we've been I've been recording a lot of content for your foundation, and I've been approaching people left, right, and center that have a great voice to speak about vaccination, especially to inform consent. And funny enough, last month I had reached out to Aaron Siri because I saw a couple of his video. I just interviewed him today. I did not know or realize who that guy actually was. I knew he was a lawyer that specializes in lawsuits against people, like for people that either have issues with mandates or issues with vaccination injuries. But it turns out he was a key member of RFK Jr.'s team on those new procedures that we're going to be talking about today. I did not know that when I approached him, so lucky for me. But it was great.
You picked a good one, Nico, to interview. Aaron Suri is a hero in many of our eyes. And I'm sure he talked about his recent book, Vaccines Amen.
Yep.
Fabulous book. He absolutely deconstructs the whole vaccine narrative of safety, efficacy, and necessity in short order.
And he's very outspoken, like very well spoken, because he's a lawyer, but he is not worried about calling it the way he sees it. That does not worry him at all. And we spoke about, because we speak a lot about pregnancy and children vaccination, and we even went into the abortion cells of the unborn that are part of those vaccines. We talked about natural birth. So it was cool. He's a very laid back guy. Like I did not expect that at all. Very, very cool dude. But let's have that conversation.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm jealous. I want to interview him as well. He was actually on my list today to call. So,
well, I got the hookups if you need them.
Yeah.
So he made it very clear. He made it very clear that it's just. It wouldn't be hard. It definitely wouldn't be hard to get him to agree to another interview. Like he seems to be very eager to speak, but he's been on Who's podcast. He's very cool to talk to. So we did speak about the new, about the CDC officially scrapping their one size fits all model and going to more of a tier approach, if you will. There's kind of three parts to their overhaul. You have what they call the 17 to 11 cut. So they're really going from 17 vaccines to 11, although Aaron called it more 25 to 18 because he counts the DPT shots that will have multiple
would MMR
vaccines.
Being considered 3 or 1? Like the MMR would
that's
be 3 or 1?
Well, I consider that 3. That's 3. I mean,
so
it's
does
in
he.
one shot, but it's 3 vaccines.
Three separate.
Yeah, so does he.
Should be 2 vaccines.
Yeah, so he sees it the exact same way. So there's the reduction from 25 to 18 or 17 to 11 if you counted it the way I did. The new 3-tier framework, which I particularly love the last part, and then the Denmark model, which Rob was asking about earlier. And it's interesting because I asked him a question, and I know where you sit on this, but I asked him, I'm like, okay, so you guys have removed Hep B, Hep A, flu, COVID-19, rotavirus, the RSV vaccine, but you kept measles, mumps, rubella, polio, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, hip, pneumococcal, chickenpox, and HPV. I'm like, why? Why are you removing those ones and keeping those ones? He's like, this is just a first step. He's like, I don't want any vaccination for, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, I don't want vaccination for children, but this is a first step. Are you satisfied as the president of Vaccine Choice Canada about that first step? And do you want them to go further?
I'm like Aaron. I mean, my thought is this is a step in the right direction, but I'm not celebrating yet. because every vaccine on the market, as far as I'm concerned, is dangerous. It harms and kills. No vaccine has been proven safe using controlled studies, using a true placebo. And so their claims of safety and efficacy, to me, is deception, it's fraud. And when you actually look at the number of vaccine adverse events that have been reported to the VAERS system in the United States, and you add them up for all of the vaccines on the schedule, it's over 1 million adverse events have been reported. And a study that was done by HHS in 2011 identified that less than 1% of actual injuries are reported. So you could multiply that number by 100. You're looking at 100 million adverse events potentially have been documented or should be documented in the United States. My own research is, and if you look at the Henry Ford study that just came out in November, a study that is considered to be the most robust vaccinated versus unvaccinated study that's ever been done in the United States. And it was withheld for 5 years because they didn't like the results of the study. And what it conclusively showed is that even being exposed to one vaccine increases your risk of having a serious chronic condition between 200 and 500%.
57, as per the Henry Ford study, 57% of vaccinated kids have chronic health issues versus only 17% of unvaccinated kids. So you're talking 3 times more.
Yeah.
That's a coincidence, though, right? One of the things Aaron was very good at, he's a very sarcastic guy. I really enjoyed that. Because he's like, what? Are you saying that vaccination could cause chronic health? Oh, really? Is that what you're saying? So what do you think of... Yeah, go ahead, Rob. Go ahead.
Hey, Rod, Ted, I was just wondering, so obviously the CDC is an American. What do you think... you probably know this better than I do. I don't know how closely I don't even know what our version is. But do we just basically rubber stamp whatever the CDC does? Do we go our own way? Do you see us in Canada trending in this direction, or what's the outlook on that?
Our schedule is almost identical to the US schedule. Okay. And when you compare it to the rest of the world, and that's one of the things that got them to this place, is that they were directed by Trump and by Kennedy to look at what other countries are doing in terms of their vaccine, recommended routine vaccines for children. And first of all, one is that you'll discover that many of the countries have significantly less recommended vaccines than Canada or the United States.
We were talking about that earlier.
Yeah, so Canada's at 17 or 18 vaccines, 17 for most Canadians, 18 if you're a First Nations person. But you look at Denmark. Denmark only has 10 diseases that it provides vaccinations for. But the part that really stood out for me is I did some research today in advance of this conversation, and I wanted to know what other European or international countries have vaccine mandates for kids to go to school. And do you have any idea what that looks like in the rest of the world in terms of childhood vaccine mandates for school attendance?
Zero. That's what would be my guess.
Well, so 17 out of 30 EU countries have no vaccine mandates for kids to go to school. And let me just give you the list of countries here, some of them: Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Iceland, United Kingdom, Netherlands, Ireland, Japan, Spain, Portugal, Switzerland, Austria, and New Zealand. So those countries have zero mandates for kids to go to school. In Canada here, we only have 2 provinces that have vaccine mandates, but that's still serious: Ontario and New Brunswick. And you're required in those 2 provinces to be either fully vaccinated or get an exemption, which they make it very difficult for you to get. In addition to that, in Ontario, in applying for an exemption, you are obligated to sign an affidavit before a public notary, that part of that affidavit that you're not allowed to change, saying that by refusing even one vaccine, you're putting your child's life at risk. And you're asked to sign that, or required to sign that, in Ontario. To me, not only is that a violation of our fundamental rights to make medical choices for our children, that's compelled speech. It's forcing you to say something that you don't believe. No parent would willingly sign a document that says, I know that I'm putting my child's life at risk. The parents that refuse to vaccinate their kids are parents that, for the most part, have done their homework. And in many cases, they have experienced vaccine injury, often within their own family. And after that, done their homework like I did. I mean, I only learned about this after my son was injured. And the goal of Vaccine Choice Canada is to reach parents before you have a vaccine injured child or a killed child, and begin to do your homework. And what I know is that the more that you do your research, the more you realize how fraudulent is the vaccine industry, how deceptive it is, how much we've been lied to. I've been asked in the last couple of weeks to write an essay called What I Wish I Would Have Known Before I Vaccinated My Son. And Rob, I don't know if you remember, my son was severely vaccine injured, had an uncontrolled seizure disorder his entire life, and passed away in 2017. Yeah. And so I started making a list of all the things I wish I would have known. And there are over 50 points of mostly scientific fact that any one of them should cause a parent to pause. And I finally had to stop at 50 because I thought this essay is getting too long.
I shouldn't be laughing at that. But to go back a bit to Rob's question, do you see Canada following those new CDC guidelines, or you don't see that happening at all?
I don't see Canada adopting the new CDC guidelines, if that's your question, Rob. I think that we have Trump derangement syndrome in this country. We have this elbows up, ideology. And so, I'm willing to bet if Biden came out with this, they would adopt it. But because Trump has come out with it,
you're absolutely right.
They're going to reject it offhand without even looking at the evidence. Canada is an outlier compared to Western nations. They give more vaccines than any other country in the world except the United States. Their schedule is virtually the same with the United States. And there's no, if you ask, and I've asked, does Health Canada do any independent testing of the vaccines? The answer is no. Is there anybody in Canada that does independent testing of the vaccines? The answer is no. They simply accept the results that are provided by the vaccine industry themselves.
That's wild.
Let me ask you something, Ted, because Aaron mentioned something, and I want you to confirm if I heard him right. So the second part of their new CDC guidelines, so the first one is to remove a bunch of the vaccines that they don't see as being what they call routine, right? That those are what they recommend every kids get. But their new approach has a 3-tier framework, which you have a definition of routine, which vaccines are considered routine. Then the second category is risk-based, only for children with specific medical condition or those vaccines going to be recommended. And then you have the third one that is shared clinical decision making, as in let the parents choose with the proper information, informed consent, basically. But one thing that he says, and he said two things I want to mention and get your opinion on. Obviously, in his opinion, every single vaccine out there should be part of the shared clinical decision making. Nobody should be forced to take any vaccines you don't want, and it should be informed consent. I think you and I agree on this. But one of the things that I realized as you were talking right now, he mentioned during the interview that they're removing a bunch of routine vaccines. So at least 7 vaccines, which shows more in injections, but 7 different vaccines now, as I said earlier, to be Hep B, Hep A, flu, COVID-19, rotavirus, RSV. 6 are no longer part of the routine schedule. And one point that he made as a lawyer is that now, because they're not considered routine anymore, they're not protected by the government lawsuit protection that we have in both the US and Canada. Did I hear him right? Because I'm just remembering this as we're speaking.
Well, and that's really the question, Nico. And if that's the case, this would be a huge win. So the question is, by removing it from the routine schedule, does that now no longer make it eligible for their immunity that they were granted in 1986? And if that's the case, and I've seen some arguments both ways about that, and likely it's something that will probably end up in the Supreme Court of the United States, because it is so important. If vaccine manufacturers are now legally liable for injury and death caused by those 6 or 7 vaccines that they removed from the routine schedule, I'm willing to bet that the next day they would stop manufacturing those vaccines because they will go out of business because of the amount of lawsuits they would be subjected to.
Because how big of a deal is that if they're no longer, if the trick to, because Aaron made it very clear that the reason, because we were talking about accountability, it's a question that I got from the audience by somebody that also their children got, one of their child got vaccine injured, and they're like, I want accountability, I want justice. And I asked Aaron about this, and he's like, unfortunately, it's very hard to get it by reversing that legislation that protects the vaccine industry against lawsuits. And not only does it protect them, but in Canada, VISP protects, gives our taxpayers money to the vaccine injured. So not only are we protecting them, but we're paying for it. But if removing them from the routine vaccine, can you imagine if instead of fighting Big Pharma, they simply just remove the routine vaccines and shove them all into risk-based or even everything in shared clinical decision making, they would lose. At least he seemed to assume that they would lose their
Legal immunity.
their oh, how big of a deal would that would
Well,
destroy the vaccine industry.
that would be huge. That would be absolutely huge. And there's a group in the United States that's actively lobbying to try to remove the liability immunity that was granted in 1986. And you're right, it's an act of Congress, and it would probably be virtually impossible to reverse that in Congress. And if what Aaron is saying is true, this is kind of an unexpected way of making vaccine manufacturers legally liable again for injury and death caused by their products. I mean, that would be worth celebrating. I'd get out the champagne for that. Because again, if vaccine manufacturers are legally liable, you can take them to court for vaccine injury, because you can't do that now. Most people don't understand that the vaccine industry is the only industry where the manufacturer is not liable for injury or death caused by their product. You'd be injured by anything else, a cup of coffee, a car, a baby stroller, a car seat, a baby crib. You can sue the manufacturer, and you see it with everything from baby powder to, all kinds of things. The vaccine industry was given immunity in 1986. And the reason they were given immunity is there were so many lawsuits against them for vaccine injury and death. They came to Congress and said, if you don't protect us, we're going to go out of business, and you just might need us in the case of biological warfare. So that's how they co-opted Congress to give them legal immunity. And as part of that agreement in 1986, there was supposed to be all kinds of safeguards in place, that there was supposed to be a report to Congress every 2 years of efforts made to increase the safety of vaccines. How many of those safety reports do you think were given to Congress since 1986?
Zero. Yeah.
Zero.
Yeah.
One of the things that I asked Aaron was about, do you think that the new policies or the new scheduling is going to somehow repair, or at least start to repair, the relationship between the patient and the doctor, try to reestablish that trust that really has been lost since COVID, since 2020? He seems to believe that maybe I need to listen to the interview. It's different recording an interview and just being there listening to it.
Right.
But what do you think? Do you think that what the CDC is doing is a step in the right direction that might start repairing that relationship between patients and doctors? Or do we need accountability? Because that was my take on it. I don't think that's enough. We need to hold them accountable for what they did.
Well, HSS, Bobby Kennedy and company are doing a couple of other things that I think are important in the States. They have withdrawn the bonuses that pediatricians in particular were given for vaccination. And so there was incentives to highly vaccinate your patient population. And that's why in the United States, you had physicians who, if you refused even one vaccine, they would kick you out of their practice. because they were given bonuses if they had, I think it was a minimum of 66% of their client population fully vaccinated. And so you may not understand the significance of that bonus money. So this is in addition to the rest of your practice. It's in addition to what you got paid to actually do the injection. You got paid bonus money for having a high rate of vaccination in your patient population. Dr. Paul Thomas estimated that he lost over $1 million a year because he failed to meet the criteria to have 66% of his patient population fully vaccinated, because he believed in informed consent. So they have now changed that so that the federal government will no longer contribute to that incentivization program. But insurance companies still do that, and the states still do that. As long as pediatricians are being given that kind of financial incentive to vaccinate, I have zero trust that they're going to make decisions or help parents to make the right decisions for their child. The other problem is that even if physicians are going to honor informed consent, the information that parents need in order to make an informed decision either doesn't exist or it's been withheld. And so, for example, the Institute of Medicine, twice now, they have reviewed the 158 suspected injuries from vaccination. And they determined that 135, I think, of the 158 injuries have not actually have any scientific evidence to prove conclusively one way or the other. The bottom line, what they're saying is the science hasn't been done to prove that the vaccine is safe. And so you can go to your doctor and saying, what do you think? But the doctor can't tell you either, because they don't know the science, because it doesn't exist. The best science we have is things like the Henry Ford study, the 2020 control group study, the 2017 Mawson study. Those are all vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies. And each one of those proved conclusively that unvaccinated children are healthier than vaccinated children. And the 2020 study also showed that the risk of dying is higher for every vaccine on the childhood schedule than the risk of dying from not being vaccinated. If parents understood that data point by themselves, they would never vaccinate their child again.
You know, as someone that lost a child to vaccination injury, and not only lost a child but took care of him, because I don't want to be rude and I don't want to overstep a line here, but he was basically invalid, right? He needed 24-hour supervision for all of his life, and
You're
he lived.
You're
I'm
talking
talking
about my
about your
son?
son.
Yeah.
Yes, he was considered invalid, right? I'm not trying to be disrespectful by using that
Well,
word here.
so he had the capacity, the intellectual capacity of about a 2.5-year-old. And he had an uncontrolled seizure disorder, which meant he could never be left unattended. So at its peak, Josh was seizing 12 to 15 times a day. And each seizure was 15 to 20 minutes long. So he was never left alone. I slept with Josh my entire life because I discovered I couldn't fall asleep while my son was in his bedroom, because I'd spend all night listening. And I finally realized that I had to actually sleep in a bed on the floor in his room so that I was confident that I would wake up when he seized. And I did that.
So it's not just one life it destroys, eh? It's every vaccine injury destroys several.
It destroys the whole family, Rob. I mean, my marriage came apart, and part of that was how do you have a marriage when you got a 4-year-old seizing 12 to 15 times a day? We have a daughter, Lanny, who's 5 years older than Josh. And so she was 9 when Josh was in this absolute crisis of seizing. How do you spend any quality time with a 9-year-old when her brother is seizing 12 to 15 times a day? You don't.
Sure.
And so, and then the cost of, to give you some idea of the medical crisis that we're in, we called an ambulance more than 30 times in a 3-month period. And so you think about the ambulance cost, the admissions. I lived at a children's hospital in Vancouver because my wife and I made a decision we would never leave our son alone in hospital. We did that one night, and when we came back the next day, he had his arms and legs strapped to a bed so that he couldn't move, and he was an infant. And so I said, I'm not leaving my son alone with you people. And so I insisted on being there at night, and my wife would come in the morning. And so my life is that I would be with my son at night in the hospital. My wife would show up in the morning with a fresh change of clothes for me. I would go find a shower in the hospital. I would drive to work. I would work during the day, and then I would drive back to the hospital and spend the evening with my son. That was my life.
Wow.
Josh
Good for you,
required,
though.
and he required a
Yeah,
one-on-one care
respect.
attendant in school. He could never be left alone.
Ted, I know you would. I'm pretty sure you had mentioned this the first time you were on, but I can't remember. How long after your son was given the vaccine did the symptoms first start? Was it immediate, or was there some time?
Well, what happened immediately is our son went from being a very happy, content baby that breastfed, was easy to feed. You know, we were absolutely thrilled with this, how healthy our baby was. And immediately after the shots, he became a very agitated, irritable, discontented baby. That was a challenge. And we actually went to the doctor twice in the next 2 weeks and said, there's something wrong with our baby. And what I say is that the child we brought home from the doctor's office was not the same child we took to the doctor's office. But it was day 21 after the shot that Josh had his first grand mal seizure. And it was 25 minutes long, and I had no idea what was happening to my son. He's just vibrating in his crib, and I didn't know what it was. I didn't realize it was a seizure. I'd never seen a seizure before. And we of course called the ambulance, went to Children's Hospital, and after a number of days they sent us home and said, here's anti-seizure medication. Everything's going to be fine. Treat your child as a normal child, and everything will be okay. A month later again, he seized again. A month later again, a month later again. And then it started to increase in frequency up until it was 12 to 15 times a day. And then the story that I've told Nico is that when Josh was 5, the chief neurologist at Vancouver Children's Hospital, took me aside one day and he said, please, Mr. Kuntz, don't bring your son back.
What? Wow. Why?
Ted.
He said, there's nothing we can do. And basically what he's saying is you're taking up hospital time, you're taking up resources, and there's nothing we can do for your son. Take him home. And I was unwilling to give up, and so I went looking for alternative health care, and I knew nothing about alternative health care. I was like most people that, if anything, I thought it was quackery, I thought it was bogus, but I mean, I wasn't going to just let my son have this kind of life. And so I found a naturopath in Surrey, BC, and she did her assessment on Josh, and the first thing out of her mouth was, she said, your son is vaccine injured. And I said, that's what I've always suspected, but the doctors at Children's Hospital kept denying that. They kept saying that I couldn't prove that it was vaccine injury. They wanted me to prove it. And through the next 3 years of using acupuncture, herbal remedies, homeopathic remedies, they reduced the seizures from 12 to 15 times a day and 15 to 20 minutes long to 3 to 4 times a month, and the seizures were 30 seconds in length.
Wow.
And that's the best we got, and that's what he lived with the rest of his life, was that rate of seizing.
Ted, when I went to Vancouver, or when I went to BC to meet you and we recorded some content, you told me this story. It didn't hit as hard as you saying it right now, because my son was not born when you had me at your home. Now seeing my son smile, seeing my son just he's such a happy baby. He's always happy. I cannot imagine. It breaks my heart right now. I cannot imagine what you went through, seeing that happy face all the time, like I'm blessed to see every single day.
Yeah.
To having, you would know right away. I could tell you in a fraction of a second that something was wrong with my son. I know. I spend most of my days with him.
Of course you would.
So I know.
Yep.
So to have people tell you that it's not vaccines, that it's not the problem, that you can't prove it, you're a very patient man. I'd be in prison for murder right now.
Well, and this was back in 1984, so it was before the 1986 Act. And I was a graduate student at the University of British Columbia at the time, and because I was a graduate student, I had access to the medical library. So I started to do my own research on the vaccine that injured my son, which was the DPT vaccine, so the pertussis, diphtheria, and tetanus shot. And what I discovered was that that vaccine had well-documented history of causing neurological injury and death. And that was the vaccine that put the vaccine industry in crisis, because there were so many lawsuits from that vaccine that's why they did the act in 1986. And shortly after that, they withdrew that vaccine from the market in North America because it was so dangerous. But they still use that vaccine in third world countries because it's a couple of cents cheaper to manufacture than the vaccine that's used in Canada and the United States. And Dr. Peter Abe, who is a doctor who was working with children in Africa, he did a study looking at vaccinated and unvaccinated children in Africa with just that vaccine alone, the DPT shot. And his research discovered that children were 5 to 10 times more likely to die from getting the vaccine than from not getting the vaccine.
That's just
Wow.
insane.
That is insane.
I don't know if you had.
I was just going to say,
go ahead.
He presented that research to the UN, to the World Health Organization, and he chastised them and said, you need to do something. You need to stop the killing of children with this vaccine. And to this day, they still use that vaccine in Africa.
Yeah, I just have one quick one, and then Nico, we can put a pin in her. But and again, if you don't mind me asking, Ted, I'm sure this is a really difficult topic, but I think there's a lot of value, I think, in hearing this stories, because we had talked about this before, but this was the first time I'd ever really heard like an up close and personal story of that kind of vaccine injury. How long was Josh able to was Josh with us before he eventually succumbed to the vaccine injury?
He was 31 when he passed.
Oh wow, I cannot imagine what kind of an act of love that must have been for you and to take care of him. Kudos to you, sir.
Well,
and I'm sure it didn't even feel like a choice. I got a son as well. It wouldn't even be a choice. You know what I mean? It would just be, this is what you have to do.
And that's what it was like for me and my wife, Josh's mom. They suggested we left Josh at the hospital and just go home and leave him, is what they told us.
You know what they'd suggest now?
Made.
Yeah.
And I just said, that's not going to happen. And so it changed my life. It changed my wife's life. She spent her whole career working with families with kids with disabilities. And of course, I moved into a different direction with Vaccine Choice Canada and other things that I do around trying to raise awareness around vaccine injury, writing books and those kinds of things. But
wow.
It's always a pleasure speaking to you. Your story's heartbreaking, and it doesn't get better every time I hear it. It doesn't get easier to hear, because man, I can't imagine. Like, we have a personal relationship, you and I, so I know more to the story than just what you're saying right now. It's just insane. I fully understand why you did what you did, why you do what you do today, and I'm always happy to have you on the show to speak about vaccination and all the troubles that are related to vaccine. Like, we need to provide people with informed consent, and that's the whole point of Vaccine Choice Canada. So as always, Ted, thank you for what you do. If you do have something you want to promote, something you want to let our listeners know, the floor is yours.
Well, I think the best resources that we have developed is a couple of books in the last couple of years. One is called A New Parent's Guide to Understanding Vaccination. It looks like you're looking for it there. and Pregnancy and Vaccination. And I think they're incredible resources that are easily readable for young parents. I just had dinner with a couple that lives in the United States, and they are big fans of Vaccine Choice Canada. And she orders, 20 copies at a time. And when she sees a pregnant woman walking down the street, she gives them a copy of our book, because she said it's the best thing I can do to help them. We are working on a third book now, which is targeting young adults 18 to 25. I hope to have that available in the next 2 months, because lots of young people are being coerced into vaccination, or they will choose a career path which will impose vaccine mandates as part of that career. So, for example, anybody that is looking to be in the healthcare profession needs to understand you will be coerced or mandated if you want to continue to practice your craft to get vaccinated with whatever they decide. And the new bill that was introduced in BC, the Health Occupations Act, Health Professions Occupation Act, Bill 36, says that the government can decide what vaccines are required for you to maintain your license. And that could change from year to year. And so you give up bodily sovereignty if you choose a profession like that. And young people need to understand that. I get questions all the time from young people saying, you know, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a nurse, I want to be a physiotherapist, I want to be a speech therapist. And I've been told that they won't put me on a practicum placement unless I have all of the vaccines on the childhood schedule. And I just say, I think you have to recognize that if you're going to follow that career path, you give up your right to say no. And are you willing to do that? And so in this book that we're creating, we actually have a number of stories of people who had to give up their career because they refused to be violated with these injections over and over and over again.
Wow.
That's great, Ted. I'm looking forward to reading it and probably doing work with you about it like we're doing right now. So
Yeah.
This makes sense. It's very logical to inform the 18
Yeah.
to 25, or probably the 16 to 25, before you make that decision. You go to college to understand what those lifelong choices actually represent here in Canada. So
Yeah.
very smart, very smart. I wouldn't have thought about that. That's very clever.
Well, we got to get to people before they get injured. And I believe every vaccine injures. It's just a question of degree. And when you begin to understand the mechanics of vaccination, you understand how it causes injury to your immune system, your neurological system, your cardiac system. I think that, well, the best stories, and Nico, you're helping us to uncover these, is when you have families that have a vaccinated child and a completely unvaccinated child, and it's a world of difference. And those are often the best advocates for people to do their homework.
Very good point.
Yeah.
Ted, thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
being on the show. Thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure.